Chapter 1. The empty seat beside my wife. My wife was halfway through ending our marriage when a waiter placed dessert in front of me. I remember that because Betrayal apparently came with chocolate mousse at the Seiwa Living 30th Anniversary Gala. 200 people were watching. Employees, bankers, suppliers, journalists, my father-in-law, half the board, and beside my wife, in the chair normally reserved for family, sat Yu Min-jae. Her first love. Hygiene stood beneath the gold Seiwa logo with a microphone in one hand. She was wearing the dark blue dress I'd helped her choose 3 weeks earlier. Back then, she'd told me she wanted something serious but not severe. Apparently the dress had survived the marriage. I know there has been speculation, she said. So, I don't want rumors distracting from what we're building. Min-jae sat behind her with the expression of a man who already knew what came next. I did too. Not all of it. Enough. Hygiene and I had been married 6 years. For most of those years, I believed stability was something you built quietly. You remembered which supplier needed 30 extra days. You noticed when her father was too tired to attend a meeting. You solved the small problem before it became the expensive one. I was good at that. Too good, as it turned out. I've decided to end my marriage, Hygiene said. A few people stopped moving. She looked directly at me. And Min-jae and I have decided to move forward together. There it was. Not just the business announcement I'd been expecting. Everything. Publicly. Min-jae rose. He was 37, polished, handsome in the expensive and carefully effortless way that required significant effort. He'd spent years working strategy for a national hospitality group, and unlike me, he had never discovered a microphone he didn't like. Hygiene continued. Min-jae will also lead Seiwa's new hospitality expansion. I believe this is the beginning of a more ambitious chapter for the company. Applause started somewhere near the press tables. It didn't spread very far. Her father didn't clap. Neither did CFO Choi Yoon-suk. Min-jae did. That seemed efficient. Hygiene watched me. I knew what she was waiting for. For months she'd been calling me cautious. Predictable. Too comfortable. Min-jae, by comparison, was bold. He talked about national expansion, flagship hotels, aggressive financing, rapid market capture. I talked about debt coverage and renewal risk. It's difficult for debt coverage to compete romantically. I pushed my chair back. Hygiene's shoulders tightened. There was a strange expectation in her expression. Fear, maybe, or anticipation. She expected me to fight. That was the first assumption she got wrong. I walked toward her slowly. The ballroom had gone quiet enough that I could hear silverware touching plates. When I reached her, I didn't look at Min-jae. I looked at my wife. Is this your decision? Her expression flickered. Maybe she had prepared for accusations. Maybe tears. Maybe a speech about our 6 years together. She hadn't prepared for a question requiring one clean answer. Yes, she said. Completely? Min-jae shifted beside her. Hygiene lifted her chin. Yes. That hurt more than I expected. Control is not the absence of pain. Sometimes it's simply deciding the pain doesn't get the microphone. I removed my wedding ring. Hygiene stared at it. You already made your choice, I said quietly. I'm only refusing to argue with it. I placed the ring beside my untouched place card. Then I turned away. Min-jae said my name. Do-yun. I kept walking. Perhaps he wanted to explain. Perhaps he wanted to offer condolences for inheriting my wife. Either way, dessert was getting warm. My phone vibrated before I reached the ballroom doors. Kim Era, my commercial attorney. I glanced at the screen. 3 Seiwa-related matters were approaching renewal decisions. The Moro Holdings subordinated note. The flagship redevelopment lease. The Atlas Grid Enterprise license. 3 separate arrangements. 3 separate deadlines. All of them legitimate. All of them older than Hygiene's relationship with Min-jae. 2 of them older than my marriage. Era's message ended with, need instructions tonight. Seiwa expansion models appear to assume automatic continuation. I stopped for half a second. Behind me, Hygiene was still on stage with Min-jae. He was telling the room about Seiwa's $45 million flagship redevelopment. He sounded confident. Min-jae was very good at confidence. It had taken him a long way. The problem with confidence was that banks eventually asked for documents. I typed one sentence. Review every obligation exactly as written. No automatic renewals or extensions. Then I put my phone away and left the ballroom. I wasn't canceling anything. I wasn't freezing accounts. I wasn't pulling money that Sewa legally had a right to use. Every signed contract would be honored. But I had spent years allowing temporary favors to become permanent assumptions. That ended when my wife announced in front of everyone that I wasn't part of her future. The hotel elevator doors closed. My phone rang. Era. I answered. Tell me you didn't drive yet. I haven't reached the parking garage. Good. I want exact instructions, because the Moro note is $9 million and matures in 4 months. Sewa's preliminary expansion model assumes an extension. The elevator descended. I watched the floor numbers change. Is there any contractual obligation to extend? No. Any written commitment from us? No. Then no automatic extension. Era was quiet. She'd worked with me long enough to know what that meant. Dian, are you sure? The elevator doors opened. Through the polished brass behind me, I could still see my reflection wearing the suit Hygiene had picked out for what was supposed to be her family celebration. I looked down at the pale line where my ring had been. No automatic extension, I repeated. Then I walked into the parking garage. Behind me, my wife and her first love were celebrating their new future. Neither of them understood yet that their future was built on several things they didn't own. Chapter 2. The Things I Stopped Carrying. 3 days after the gala, I went back to the apartment Hygiene and I had shared. I chose 11 in the morning because she was supposed to be at Sewa headquarters. I wasn't interested in a dramatic packing scene. I owned clothes, books, 2 watches, a coffee grinder I liked more than was reasonable, and approximately 6 cables whose purpose I hadn't understood since 2022. I could leave efficiently. The more difficult part was everything else. Not possessions. Responsibilities. I sat at the dining table and made folders. Apartment. Insurance. Chairman CEO. Sewa vendors. Property contacts. Professional introductions. Family administration. Hygiene had always teased me about organizing things. You'd label the refrigerator shelves if I'd let you. She'd been wrong. I tried once. She removed the labels. Marriage was compromise. I was putting the last folder into a box when the front door opened. Hygiene walked in. She stopped when she saw me. You're here. That was the plan. I thought you'd call. I emailed. Her lips tightened. You emailed me to tell me you were moving out of our home. It seemed clearer than guessing when you'd be gone. She looked at the boxes. For a second, she didn't look like the executive who had stood on stage beside Min Jae. She looked tired, almost uncertain. Then she saw the folders. What are those? Things you'll need. She picked up the one labeled Chairman SEO. Inside were contact details for her father's cardiologist, medication refill reminders, the driver's schedule, and the name of the assistant at the private clinic who knew how to get an urgent appointment without making her father sit in a waiting room for 4 hours. Hygiene frowned. Why do you have all this? I looked at her. Because your father hates making appointments. I thought his secretary handled it. Sometimes. She opened another folder. Sewa vendors. There were names, phone numbers, notes about which timber supplier preferred direct calls, which logistics partner had a new credit manager, which factory insurance broker had been negotiating a renewal. Her expression changed. Why are you giving me this? Because I won't be handling it anymore. You don't have to stop everything. There it was. The second assumption. Our marriage could end, but the useful parts of me could apparently remain on subscription. Hygiene. I'm not asking you to interfere with Min Jae. I'm talking about normal things. You've known some of these people for years. So have you. That isn't what I mean. I know. She put the folder down harder than necessary. You're making this punitive. No. You just happen to stop helping 3 days after I leave you. You didn't leave me privately. You announced a new life in front of half your company's business network. Her jaw tightened. So this is about embarrassment. No. It's about definitions. What does that mean? It means I'm no longer your husband. I'm also not Sewa's unpaid problem solver. She stared at me. I could see anger arriving, because anger was easier than looking at the folders and asking how many invisible things had been happening around her. I thought you'd at least help until things settle. Things don't settle by themselves. That sounds like one of your lectures. It wasn't intended as one. I zipped my suitcase. Her eyes moved toward my hand. The ring was gone. She noticed. Of course she noticed. You really took it off. You saw me take it off. That isn't what I meant. I knew what she meant. She had expected the gala to begin a negotiation. Maybe weeks of arguments. Maybe months. She knew I loved her. She was counting on that love to slow down consequences. The problem was that love had never made contracts invisible to me. Are you filing immediately? She asked. Era is preparing the paperwork. Era. She said the name differently. Kim Era had been my attorney for almost a decade. Hygiene knew her. She'd never liked how quickly Era could identify a vague statement and ask the one question that made it less comfortable. Yes. You already spoke to her? Of course. That bothered her more than it should have. You planned this? No. I responded to it. The distinction did not improve her mood. I lifted the last box. As I did, an old rolled site plan slid from the side and landed on the floor. Hygiene bent to pick it up. It was the redevelopment parcel under Sewa's new flagship project. She recognized the address immediately. Why do you have this? I've reviewed the property files before. She unrolled enough of the map to see the ownership block. Morrow Redevelopment 1 LLC. Her eyes paused on it. Morrow? Yes. The same Morrow that financed Dad? I picked up my box. Yes. She looked at me again. There were questions in her face now. Not the right ones yet, but better questions. I took the map from her, then reconsidered and handed it back. Keep it. It's a copy. She looked at the ownership block. Duyan. I stopped at the door. What? What exactly are you doing? I looked around the apartment. 6 years of marriage had accumulated in ordinary places. The walnut dining table we'd argued over because she wanted marble. The framed photograph from our second anniversary. The small burn mark on the kitchen counter from the night she tried to make caramel and nearly set a towel on fire. Our marriage had been real. That was what made leaving hurt. But something being real did not mean it had to remain. I'm stopping, I said. Stopping what? Carrying things nobody thinks I'm carrying. I left. Later that afternoon, Hygiene texted me. One question. Who owns Morrow Redevelopment 1? I read it. Then I put the phone face down. Some answers arrived more usefully after people had exhausted the wrong ones. Subscribe. Chapter 3. The renewal nobody checked. Min-jae's first expansion presentation after the gala had 27 slides. I didn't attend. Eun-suk sent me the relevant pages afterward because 3 slides reference contracts involving my companies. Slide 23 was labeled Risk Management. It contained 6 bullet points, 3 arrows, and a photograph of a sunrise. That told me more about Min-jae than the other 26 slides combined. Eun-suk called that evening. You've seen it? I've seen the sunrise. She sighed. Eun-suk had been Sewa's CFO for 11 years. She had the rare ability to make disappointment sound like an accounting policy. He assumes the Morrow note rolls for another 5 years. I noticed. He also assumes the redevelopment lease extends at essentially the existing rate. I noticed that too. An Atlas grid stays under the current licensing arrangement through the hotel opening. Yes. Have you agreed to any of that? No. She was quiet. Has anyone asked you? No. Another pause. Then we have a problem. No. You have assumptions. They become problems when people spend money based on them. That had always been my view. Assumptions were cheap at the beginning. They became expensive after construction started. Eun-suk had raised all 3 issues during the meeting. She told me how it went. Min-jae had stood at the front of the boardroom, while Hygiene sat near him. Morrow has been with Sewa for 8 years, he'd said. There's no rational reason they wouldn't extend. Eun-suk had answered, that isn't a commitment. It's a relationship. Banks don't lend against relationships. Min-jae smiled. That's why relationships need people who know how to manage them. Hygiene had backed him. We've always renewed these arrangements. That sentence was technically false in 3 different ways. The Morrow note had never reached maturity before. The property lease had an extension once, negotiated under a different business plan. An Atlas Grid's enterprise license had been amended twice. But Min-jae's confidence was giving Hyejin something she wanted very badly. Proof that choosing him had been bold instead of reckless. Admitting problems 3 days after publicly choosing him would require another possibility. That she had humiliated her husband for a man whose grand strategy relied on contracts he hadn't read. So she chose confidence. People often did when facts arrived at inconvenient times. Meanwhile, I sat across from Era in her office while she reviewed every Seiwa-related document. Current obligations remain untouched, she said. Yes. No acceleration. Yes. No revocation of rights they've already paid for. Yes. No calls to suppliers telling them to tighten terms. Obviously, Era looked over her glasses. I have to say it because you're getting divorced. I'm not becoming a Bond villain. I've met divorced men. Fair. She slid 3 files toward me. The note matures in 4 months. Lease negotiation window opens in 6 weeks. Atlas grid renewal discussion is due within 30 days. Send ordinary notices. Ordinary. Exactly the same notices we'd send anyone else. No marriage references? Era. I had to ask. I leaned back. For the first time since the gala, I felt something that was almost relief. Not because Hyejin was in trouble. She wasn't. Not yet. Because the rules were suddenly clear. For 6 years, I'd mixed roles constantly. Husband, investor, software founder, property owner, family fixer, informal advisor. I had told myself I was being generous. Sometimes generosity was just poor boundary management in nicer clothes. My phone rang. Hyejin. First call since I left. Era looked at the screen. Want privacy? No. I answered. Hyejin. Do you have a minute? Yes. She didn't ask how I was. I noticed that. Eun-suk is making an issue out of Moro's refinancing. She's probably doing her job. We need a contact there. You have one. The general relationship team isn't enough. Dad used to deal directly with someone senior. He did. Can you introduce Min-jae? I looked at Era. Era's expression did not change, which meant she was enjoying herself professionally. Why? Hyejin exhaled. Because Min-jae needs to confirm the extension for the bank package. Has Moro offered an extension? No, but they've supported Seiwa for years. That's history, not an offer. Dian, please don't do this. I felt the first real edge in my chest. Do what? Turn everything into technicalities. There was a time when I would have fixed the problem simply to end the tension. That had been my mistake. I asked one question instead. Have you read the maturity clause? Silence. What? The Moro note. Have you read the maturity clause? I know what the agreement is. That wasn't my question. Another silence. Longer. No. Read it. Dian. The answer you're asking me for is already in the document. I ended the call. Era tapped her pen against the table. I'm proud of you. Don't be. I still want to call her back. That sounds more believable. I stared at my phone, because I didn't want to call her. I wanted to say there was a simple way through this. Slow the expansion. Renegotiate the lease. Don't treat renewal as entitlement. Don't borrow 12-year money against 4-year site control. It would have been easy for me to explain. That was exactly why I didn't. For years, I had mistaken being useful for being heard. At Seiwa headquarters, Hyejin finally opened the note agreement. Section 6.2 was not complicated. Maturity meant maturity. Extension required written agreement of both parties. There was no automatic renewal, no guaranteed option, no promise. And according to Eun-suk, after Hyejin finished reading it, she asked the question Min-jae should have asked before building a $45 million plan around it. Who exactly controls Moro? Chapter 4. Put it in writing. Hyejin asked to meet at a restaurant near Seiwa headquarters. Not our usual restaurant. That mattered more than it should have. For 6 years, difficult conversations happened at home or at the small Japanese place near the river where the owner never rushed us. This place was polished, neutral, and expensive. A negotiation location. She arrived 5 minutes late and went directly to the point. Are you refusing the Moro extension? I haven't been asked for one formally. You know what I mean. Yes. And I won't authorize an automatic extension. Her face hardened. You're punishing me. I expected you to say that. Because it's true? Because it's easier than reading the timeline. She pushed her water glass aside. Everything was fine until the gala. No. Everything was assumed until the gala. That's convenient. Hygiene. The note had a maturity date before you decided to leave me. You've extended help to my family for years. And every existing agreement is being honored. But you know Sewa needs continuity. Then Sewa should have negotiated continuity before promising an expansion. Her eyes flashed. So, because I chose Min-jae, I held up a hand. No. She stopped. I didn't cancel your contract. I declined to volunteer for the next one. The words landed between us. She looked away first. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You used to care what happened to the company. I still care. It doesn't look like it. That isn't the same as financing any plan you choose. Min-jae believes we can replace Moro. Then you don't have a problem." Her jaw tightened. Perfect timing, apparently, because Min-jae arrived. I had not been told he was coming. He wore a charcoal suit and the relaxed smile of a man entering a conversation he believed he could win. Hygiene said you two were discussing the financing. Hygiene and I were discussing it. He took the chair beside her anyway. I'd rather keep this professional. That would be refreshing. His smile thinned. He leaned forward. I understand you're reconsidering Moro's participation. No. Moro has not committed to new participation. Semantics. Banks enjoy semantics. Alternative capital exists. Good. His confidence increased when I didn't challenge him. We've already spoken to 2 institutions. Excellent. The lease can also be refinanced into the project structure. Can it? Yes. An Atlas grid can be replaced if necessary. Also good. Hygiene glanced between us. Min-jae continued. I'm trying to be respectful. But Sewa cannot build its future around one person's willingness to cooperate. For the first time, I almost smiled. On that point, we agreed completely. You shouldn't. He mistook that for surrender. I think we're clear then. Almost. I took out my phone. Send Unsuk your assumptions. He frowned. What? Moro replacement financing, property continuity, Atlas grid replacement. Put the assumptions and expected costs in writing. Why? Because confidence improves considerably when it has to sign its name. Hygiene looked at me sharply. Min-jae laughed. You think I'm afraid to document a financing strategy? No. Then I'll send it. Good. He did. That afternoon. Moro replaceable through commercial senior debt. Site control expected to remain available. Atlas grid replaceable within 6 months at limited transitional cost. I forwarded the email to Era. Her response came 30 seconds later. Please tell me you did not provoke him into writing this. I wrote back. I asked politely. She replied. That somehow makes it worse. Later that day, Era came to my office with another file. Something unrelated to Sewa. I looked up. Those are my favorite words lately. She placed a property brief in front of me. An abandoned industrial parcel on the other side of the city. 32 acres. Old warehouse structures. Rail access. Good highway connection. The municipality wanted redevelopment. Atlas Grid has been talking about a pilot manufacturing campus for smaller producers, she said. You mentioned it last year. I had. Then Hygiene's expansion had accelerated. Her father had needed help restructuring vendor commitments. I had postponed my project. Like I postpone a lot of things. I flipped through the photos. Broken concrete. Rusting steel. A roof that looked personally offended by rain. I liked it immediately. Who owns it? Municipal Development Corporation. Any environmental issues? Manageable. Preliminary assessment attached. Let's inspect it. Era watched me. You mean that? Yes. You're not going to spend the next 6 months circling Sewa? The question irritated me because I didn't have an immediate answer. No. Good. She stood, then paused. For what it's worth, moving forward is different from pretending something didn't hurt. I know. Do you? Era. Right. Billable wisdom is extra. After she left, I looked at the property images again. For the first time in weeks, I was thinking about something that had nothing to do with hygiene. My phone buzzed. It was a forwarded message from one of Seiwa's potential replacement lenders. The message was addressed to Min Jae. Before we proceed, please provide evidence Seiwa controls the flagship redevelopment site for the full 12-year proposed loan term. I read it twice. Min Jae had spent the week proving Moro could be replaced. The lender had moved on to a simpler question. Did Seiwa actually own the ground under its $45 million future? It didn't. Chapter 5. The land under their future. The bank meeting went badly because of one sentence. Han Mira, Seiwa's relationship manager, asked Min Jae, "Why are you requesting a 12-year facility against a project with 4 years of secured site control?" Eun-suk told me later that Min Jae paused for less than a second. That was one of his genuine strengths. Most people needed time to manufacture certainty. Min Jae could do it instantly. The lease has historically been renewable. Mira looked at the documents. That isn't what I asked. The landlord has had a long relationship with Seiwa. Do you have an extension agreement? We're in discussions. Eun-suk turned slightly toward him. They weren't. Mira noticed. Bankers made careers out of noticing small facial movements around large numbers. Then our underwriting will remain paused until site control is resolved. Min Jae tried to redirect to projected hotel revenue. Mira redirected him to property rights. He discussed brand value. She discussed security. He discussed strategic flexibility. That phrase appeared often whenever Min Jae meant we haven't secured it yet. By lunch, the bank had paused the package. Not rejected it. Not destroyed Seiwa. Paused. Real consequences usually started with boring verbs. Review. Delay. Reprice. Reconsider. Then somebody eventually discovered the boring verbs were costing real money. While that meeting was happening, Era and I were standing in a weed-covered industrial yard 15 miles away. The abandoned parcel she'd found was ugly. Objectively ugly. The main warehouse had 6 broken windows and one wall painted with a mural of something that might have been a tiger or an unusually aggressive orange house cat. I loved it. You see potential, Era said. I see loading access. Romantic. There are 2 rail spurs. Control yourself. The site could work. My idea was simple. Atlas Grid had spent years optimizing large manufacturers, but smaller specialty producers couldn't afford full internal logistics teams. A shared adaptive manufacturing campus could give them common warehousing, software, shipping, maintenance, and financing support without taking away ownership of their businesses. I'd been sketching the idea for 2 years. Then Seiwa needed help. Then Chairman CO needed help. Then Hygiene needed help. There was always a reason to wait. I looked at the broken warehouse. Let's commission environmental and structural work. Era nodded. That's an actual instruction? Yes. She smiled. Good. That afternoon, Chairman CO called me. He didn't mention hygiene at first. He asked about my health, then whether I'd eaten. Korean fathers-in-law could conduct an emotional intervention through food intake. Eventually, he said, the bank paused underwriting. I heard. Min Jae believes the lease issue can be solved quickly. It can be discussed quickly. Not the same thing. No. He sighed. Jae-sung had built Seiwa from a small furniture workshop into a respected regional manufacturer. He understood the difference between controlling something and being allowed to use it. His daughter had grown up after the hardest years that had shaped all of us. I told Hygiene to read the original files, he said. That seems sensible. She thinks I am siding with you. Are you? I am siding with documents. I almost laughed. Dangerous habit. He was silent for a moment. I should have told her more. I knew what he meant. No. Yes. You gave me your word. And I used that promise as an excuse not to teach my daughter how much risk existed underneath the company. That was new. Before I could answer, he said, she may contact you about the property. I assumed. Be fair. I will. Don't be generous. I understood that too. Generosity without discipline was how we had arrived here. Later, I learned Hygiene went directly from the bank to the flagship redevelopment site. Construction had already begun on the first phase. Steel frame, foundation work, utility relocation. A large sign at the entrance showed an artist's rendering of the future Seiwa flagship hotel and design complex. Min Jae's name wasn't on the sign. His ambition was Hygiene found the property manager. She showed him the lease. I need to speak to whoever approves extensions. He gave her the contact information for Manhwa Redevelopment 1. She looked at the company name. No, I need the person who can actually approve it. The property manager hesitated. He knew her. He knew me. He assumed she knew. That was the interesting thing about hidden information. Sometimes nobody was hiding it. Everyone simply believed somebody else had already explained. Mr. Park, he said. Hygiene frowned. What, Mr. Park? The manager's expression changed. Your husband. She stared at him. He corrected himself awkwardly. Mr. Park Duyun. His company owns the site. That evening, Hygiene called me 3 times. I didn't answer because I was in a structural engineering meeting about the new parcel. On the 4th call, I stepped outside. Hello. Her voice was different. No anger yet. Mostly disbelief. Do you own the land under the flagship project? There are moments when 6 years of marriage compress into one question. Yes. The silence lasted so long, I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, she said, I'm coming to see you. Chapter 6. The Husband Who Owned the Ground. Hygiene found me at the redevelopment site the next morning. Not my new site. Hers. Or what she had thought was hers. I was walking the southern boundary with a civil engineer and the property manager, reviewing drainage access that would become important whether Sewa renewed or another buyer eventually took the parcel. Hygiene crossed the gravel in heels, completely unsuited to construction. She didn't seem to care. Duyun. The engineer looked at me. I nodded toward the site office. Give us 10 minutes. When we were alone, Hygiene held up a copy of the lease. Your company owns this? Manhwa Redevelopment 1 does. Your company? Yes. For how long? 8 years. She stared at me. Before we were married. Yes. Why? Because Sewa needed it. That doesn't answer anything. It answered quite a lot, actually. But she deserved the longer version. 8 years earlier, Sewa had been in worse condition than most employees knew. A failed retail expansion. Supplier pressure. Thin cash reserves. The property beside their factory had gone into distress. Sewa needed the land to consolidate logistics and had no borrowing capacity left to buy it. Manhwa had purchased the parcel. Sewa received a long lease at favorable terms. What is Manhwa? She asked. A private investment company. I know that. What is it to you? I control the property subsidiary. Her eyes narrowed. That isn't the same answer. No. Then give me the full one. Not here. Why not? Because we're standing beside an excavator while your construction manager is pretending not to listen through a trailer wall. She glanced toward the office. The blinds moved. I was probably right. We walked farther down the site. Hygiene looked over the construction. You let us build all of this without telling me? Sewa has a lease. That isn't what I'm asking. You knew Sewa leased the property. I didn't know it was yours. Would that have changed whether the lease existed? It would have changed a lot. There was more truth in that sentence than she intended. I looked at her. Would it have changed the gala? Her face tightened. That isn't fair. No. It's a question. Minjae has nothing to do with the ownership. He has quite a lot to do with the expansion being built on assumptions about it. She looked away. You could extend the lease. Yes. Will you? I'll consider a short transition extension at market terms. Her head snapped back. Market terms? Yes. We've never paid market terms here. I know. So you are punishing us. No. You expect me to believe it's coincidence that suddenly you want market rent? I picked up the lease in her hand and opened to the renewal provision. The current favorable term was part of an arrangement created when Sewa was financially weak and needed stability. It was never guaranteed forever. My father believed you'd continue. Your father knows better than that. What is that supposed to mean? It means your father negotiated this agreement. He knows exactly what it says. She stared at me. I could see the ground shifting under something larger than the construction site. Her understanding of me. Our marriage. Her father's company. You never told me you had this kind of money. I told you I had investments. You said you sold software. I did. You made it sound like you were comfortable. I am comfortable. Duyun. What number would have changed how you treated me? She went quiet. That wasn't a trap. I genuinely wanted to know. She had always known I wasn't poor. We had separate property under a prenup. I never asked Sewa for employment. I never depended on her family financially. But I had deliberately avoided making money part of our marriage. I wanted to know whether I could be loved without the balance sheet entering the room first. At the time, that had seemed principled. Later, I would realize I had also used secrecy to avoid vulnerability. If I never explained how much I carried, I never had to ask whether anyone valued it. Hygiene looked toward the steel skeleton of the new hotel. What are my options? That was finally the right kind of question. A short extension, while Sewa restructures the project. And the second? Purchase the parcel at an independently appraised price. We can't afford that and the expansion. I know. Anything else? Reduce the project. Her expression closed again. Min Jae says reducing it now would destroy market confidence. Min Jae says many things. He has more experience in hospitality expansion than you. Yes. She seemed surprised that I agreed. I continued. He also worked for companies with balance sheets large enough to absorb mistakes. Sewa doesn't have that margin. You've never respected what we're trying to build. That hurt. Because once, I remembered Hygiene on the factory floor 4 years earlier, sleeves rolled up, arguing with a designer over a new furniture line. She'd been brilliant that day. Focused. Funny. Alive. I had loved her ambition. What I didn't love was watching ambition become an excuse not to verify anything inconvenient. Using something for years and owning it are different facts, I said. She looked at me. So that's it? No. What else? If Sewa has to restructure, I won't support any plan that sacrifices the factory employees to preserve the hospitality expansion. Her eyes narrowed. You don't get to decide that. Not for Sewa. I decide what my capital supports. I returned the lease. Era will send transition options. I walked away. Behind me, Hygiene didn't call my name. My phone rang before I reached my car. Chairman CEO. I answered. He said nothing about me. He asked, is she still there? Yes. Did she learn about the land? Yes. He sighed. Then she'll think that's the secret. I stopped. What are you planning? Nothing. Chairman. Dun. The land is not the part she should be asking me about. Across the site, Hygiene's phone began ringing. She looked at the screen. Her father. For the first time since the gala, she wasn't looking at me like a husband refusing to cooperate. She was looking at me like a stranger she had somehow been married to for 6 years. Chapter 7. The price of replacing stability. Replacing me turned out to be possible. That was important. I was not magical. Moro's $9 million could be replaced. The land could be bought or leased elsewhere. Atlas Grid could be migrated. Every individual problem had an alternative. The trouble was price. The replacement lenders wanted more interest, more collateral, more covenants. One asked Sewa to contribute another $6 million of equity before drawing the first dollar. Another wanted guarantees tied to the profitable manufacturing business. That last one was where I stopped finding the situation merely predictable. The factory employed around 240 people. They had not chosen Min Jae. They had not stood on a hotel stage and announced anything. Their jobs shouldn't become collateral for somebody else's need to prove he had been right. Mira invited me to the bank because Sewa had asked for a joint discussion with the current note holder and property owner. Hygiene arrived alone. That surprised me. She sat across from me in a conference room designed entirely in shades of beige. Banks apparently believed color increased credit risk. You look tired, I said. She gave me a brief, almost bitter smile. You look fine. I sleep. Congratulations. There was the Hygiene I remembered. For a second, it hurt in a completely different way. Then Mira excused herself to retrieve documents. Hygiene folded her hands. I've been thinking about us. I waited. About the last year. Still I waited. I think we both stopped talking. That was true. She looked at me carefully. You buried yourself in work. I buried myself in Sewa. Min Jae came back at a time when I felt like... She stopped. Like what? Like somebody saw what I could become. That sentence was honest enough to deserve respect. I nodded. I understand. Her eyes softened. Then she said, which is why I think if we can stop treating this like enemies, maybe Moro and the lease. There it was. I actually laughed once. Not loudly. Just enough. Her face changed. What? You lasted almost 40 seconds. Do you? If you want to discuss our marriage, discuss our marriage. Don't use it as an introduction to refinancing. That isn't what I'm doing. It is exactly what you're doing. She leaned back. You always reduce everything to transactions. No. I spent 6 years doing the opposite. That's part of the problem. Mira returned before Hygiene could answer. We reviewed the alternatives. I offered something straightforward. Shrink the development. Sell or postpone the hotel component. Protect manufacturing cash flow. Mora would consider a short, structured extension during the transition. Atlas Grid could remain under a normal commercial license. The property lease could be extended long enough to execute the smaller plan. Nobody needed to collapse. Nobody needed to be humiliated. Hygiene looked at the proposal. This cuts almost half the flagship concept. Yes. Min-jae says pulling back now tells the entire market we failed. Mira spoke before I did. The market does not currently finance your feelings about the word failure. I liked Mira. Hygiene turned to me. You agree with her. I agree with arithmetic. Of course you do. There was contempt in it, but not as much as before. Mostly exhaustion. She refused the smaller plan that day. Not formally. She said she needed to discuss it with Min-jae. By that evening, I knew what Min-jae had said. Retreat was unacceptable. The lenders would come around. The land could be solved. The software could be solved. Everything could be solved. He wanted the board to authorize more leverage while he rebuilt the package. Chairman Seo opposed it. Eun-suk opposed it. Hygiene supported him. That was her third rail exit ramp. She chose not to take it. Meanwhile, my own project moved forward. The municipality liked the adaptive manufacturing concept. They offered to discuss infrastructure incentives if we rehabilitated the old site instead of demolishing everything. I spent an afternoon with architects walking through the ruined warehouse. For the first time in years, a project meeting energized me instead of leaving me responsible for somebody else's emergency. One architect asked what I wanted the campus to feel like. I almost answered with loading times. Instead, I thought about it. Useful, I said, but not anonymous. Era, standing beside me, looked over. That sounded suspiciously emotional. Don't spread it around. I have confidentiality obligations. My phone buzzed. A message from Sang-ho, Sewa's operations director. You should know they requested a full Atlas Grid replacement estimate. I stared at it. Min-jae had finally moved from talking about replacing the software to trying. I wrote, that's their right. Give the vendor reasonable technical access under the confidentiality agreement. A few minutes later, you know this is going to be ugly, right? I did. Atlas Grid was not a magical switch controlling Sewa. But over 8 years, it had been customized around production scheduling, inventory, supplier timing, waste monitoring, quality data, and warehouse routing. Replacing it was possible. Replacing it in 6 months without significant disruption was not. That evening, Eun-suk sent Hygiene the preliminary estimate. She copied me because Atlas Grid licensing was involved. The highlighted number was $3.8 million. Preliminary only. Estimated migration timeline, 14 to 18 months. I looked at it and felt no triumph. Mostly fatigue. There was no joy in watching someone pay to discover the value of a thing they had already possessed. But I did notice one fact. While Min-jae was spending millions figuring out how to remove me from Sewa's past, I had just received preliminary approval to build somewhere else. Chapter 8. The system he called replaceable. The replacement software team arrived at Sewa's factory on a Monday morning carrying tablets, laptops, and the optimism of people who had not yet seen the production database. I was there because Atlas Grid had contractual obligations during transition planning. That surprised Min-jae. He saw me beside Sang-ho near the main production line and frowned. Why is he here? Sang-ho looked at him. He owns the system you're trying to migrate away from. Min-jae gave him a look. Sang-ho corrected himself. His company owns it. Close enough. The factory was the best part of Sewa. Not the hotel renderings. Not the executive floor. The factory. Furniture components moved along organized lines beneath high ceilings while cutting systems, finish stations, quality checks, and packing crews worked in a rhythm Atlas grid had spent years helping stabilize. One of the outside engineers examined the production dashboard. How much of this is standard deployment? Sang-ho laughed. The engineer looked concerned. Is that bad? Depends how long you were planning to be here. Min-jae crossed his arms. We were told this was ordinary manufacturing software. By who? Sang-ho asked. Your own IT team. Our IT team said it was supported enterprise software. That's not the same thing. Min-jae looked toward me. Perhaps you can clarify. I can. I showed the engineers the customization layers. Supplier forecasting, waste optimization, warehouse routing, scheduling rules specific to Seiwa's mixed furniture lines. Nothing impossible to recreate. But rebuilding 8 years of accumulated operational logic was not the same as installing a new accounting package. The lead engineer asked, who designed the original architecture? Sang-ho pointed at me. Him. Hygiene, who had just entered the production area, stopped. What? Sang-ho looked between us. You didn't know? I closed my eyes briefly. Sang-ho had many strengths. Tact was seasonal. Hygiene looked at me. You designed Atlas Grid? The original platform. I thought you sold a software company. I did. What was it called? Atlas Systems originally. Her face changed. Years earlier, before we married, I told her I'd founded manufacturing software and later sold a majority position. She'd known. Technically, what she had never connected was that Atlas Grid, the product sitting inside Seiwa's operations, had grown from that company. After the acquisition, the enterprise platform had been renamed. I'd retained intellectual property interests and eventually reacquired control of the specialized manufacturing division through Moro. Hygiene had never asked much about it, and I'd never insisted she understand. That failure belonged partly to me. Min-jae stepped in. Historical ownership doesn't change migration. No, I said. The lead engineer cleared his throat. Actually, the historical architecture matters quite a lot. Min-jae ignored him. We've budgeted $4 million. The engineer looked uncomfortable. That was preliminary. How preliminary? We're currently closer to 5. Sang-ho rubbed his forehead. In timeline, 14 months would be aggressive. You said 12. Before we assessed customization. Min-jae's expression hardened. There has to be a faster method. Sang-ho said, we could run the factory on motivational speeches. I turned away because laughing would have been unprofessional. The final migration estimate came 2 days later. Just under $5 million. 14 to 18 months. Additional operational risk reserve recommended. Min-jae's promised savings disappeared. More importantly, Seiwa's lenders saw another cash requirement appear beside the land problem and the Moro refinancing gap. The board tightened approval authority. No additional expansion spending without finance committee review. That was the first time Min-jae lost actual control. He didn't respond well. He accused Atlas Grid of deliberately creating dependence. Eun-suk reminded him Seiwa had voluntarily expanded the software deployment for 8 years because it reduced waste. He said the company should have diversified systems earlier. Sang-ho reminded him that running 3 competing planning platforms for ideological independence was not generally considered efficient. Then Min-jae blamed prior management. There was a pattern forming. When confidence worked, decisions belonged to him. When facts arrived, ownership became surprisingly communal. That evening, Sang-ho met me at a small workshop I had rented near the proposed new campus. He walked around the scale model. You're actually doing this? Yes. You've talked about it forever. I've had free time recently. He gave me a sideways look. You're terrible. A divorce clears the calendar. That earned half a laugh. Then he became serious. If Seiwa restructures, I won't abandon the factory during it. I wouldn't ask you to, but afterward, he looked around the model. If this becomes real, I'd like to help. That mattered. Sang-ho understood manufacturing in a way no spreadsheet could teach. After all your obligations are complete, I said, and only if you're leaving Seiwa voluntarily. Of course. No recruiting your team. I know. Good. He looked at me. You really aren't trying to destroy them. No. Some people at Sewa think you are. Some people at Sewa also thought the lease renewed automatically. Fair. That night, Hygiene searched old Atlas corporate records. I learned about it because she called Era requesting historical transaction documents she had no legal right to receive. Era declined politely. Public records were enough. An archived business article from years earlier listed me as Atlas Systems founder. Another described the majority sale. The last sentence contained the part Hygiene had never known. Founder Park Du-Yun retained substantial proceeds and related technology holdings through his private investment vehicle, Moro Holdings. At 11:17 p.m., my phone lit up. Hygiene. I didn't answer. A minute later, a message appeared. Do you own Moro? I read it. Then another. How much of it? Then a third. Why didn't you tell me? For 6 years, my wife had thought she understood the scale of my life. Now she had finally begun asking questions. Unfortunately for her, those questions had arrived after she chose somebody else in front of everyone. Chapter 9. The story Min Jae couldn't control. Min Jae's next strategy was reputation. That was not surprising. Financing had become difficult. The land problem was real. Atlas grid replacement was expensive. When numbers stopped cooperating, he changed the subject to motive. According to people who contacted me that week, Min Jae began telling business contacts that I was using legacy relationships to retaliate against Sewa because Hygiene had left me. He never said sabotage directly. People with corporate experience rarely used words that useful. Instead, he said things like, personal tensions are complicating commercial discussions, and certain legacy stakeholders have become less cooperative following recent private events. Elegant language. Ugly implication. Hygiene confronted him about it before an industry design conference. I knew because she told me later. You said Du-Yun was irrelevant to the expansion, she said. He should be. That's not what I asked. He's making himself relevant. He owns the land, which he could extend. He founded Atlas, which he could license. He may own Moro. Min Jae paused. That one reached him. Do you know that? I found public records. He never told you? No. Min Jae recovered quickly. Then doesn't that prove my point? What point? He hid his position from his own wife. Now he's revealing leverage piece by piece. Hygiene wanted that explanation to be true. I understand why. If I had designed the entire situation, then she was a victim of manipulation. If I hadn't, she had simply failed to understand the man she'd been married to while betting her future on one who hadn't checked his assumptions. The conference banquet was held 3 nights later. I almost skipped it. Atlas Grid had been nominated for an Industry Technology Award, but I had avoided public events for years. Era told me to go. Why? Because hiding when somebody lies about you is a surprisingly effective way to help them. I don't enjoy these events. I know. That's why your suits last so long. I went. Hygiene was there. So was Min Jae. The room resembled the Sewa Gala enough to irritate me. Same expensive lighting. Same name cards. Different dessert. I had learned to be suspicious of formal desserts. A trade journalist approached during the reception. Mr. Park, can I ask about Sewa? You can ask. There's talk that Moro-backed financing was abruptly withdrawn following your separation from Ms. Seo. Across the room, I saw Min Jae speaking to 2 developers. Hygiene was watching me. I could have ended the story in 30 seconds. I could have explained the note. The land. Moro. The software. The gala. Everything. Instead I said, no existing financing was withdrawn. The journalist waited. That all. All signed obligations are being honored according to their terms. Future arrangements are separate decisions. Is the divorce affecting negotiations? I won't discuss my marriage at an industry event. That answer spread faster than anything dramatic would have, because Mira from Sewa's bank was also there. When another journalist asked her whether Moro had triggered Sewa's problems, she gave the banker version of a public correction. Our current review relates to assumptions concerning future capital, site control, and project structure. We have not identified a breach of existing Moro obligations. Translated into normal language, Du-Yun didn't take anything away. Sewa promised itself things it didn't have. Min-jae was furious. He cornered Eun-suk near the elevators. You need to clarify that Moro's past practice created an expectation. Eun-suk stared at him. An expectation is not a commitment. You know how this looks? Yes. You're allowing him to control the narrative. No. I'm refusing to alter records to improve yours. Hyejin heard that. Something changed after. Not dramatically. She didn't abandon Min-jae in the ballroom. She didn't run to me. Real regret rarely arrived with orchestral music. It arrived as doubt, a question you couldn't stop asking. Later that evening, Hyejin found me alone near the terrace. Era had stepped away to take a call. Hyejin glanced toward her. You and Era seem close. It was the first personal thing she'd asked me since the bank meeting. We've worked together for years. That's not what I meant. Interesting. I looked at her. What did you mean? She hesitated. Are you seeing her? No. Something in her shoulders relaxed. I noticed. So did she. Then she asked, Are you planning to? Hyejin. I just asked. I don't know. She looked toward the terrace windows. You seem different. I sleep more. She almost smiled. You used that one already. I've had fewer emergency family spreadsheets. That actually made her laugh. For half a second, we were ourselves again. Then the laugh disappeared. Why didn't you tell me about Atlas? You knew I built software. Not that software. You never asked. Her face hardened. So this is my fault? No. That part is mine too. She looked surprised. I continued. I spent years assuming that if I did enough quietly, eventually you'd understand what it meant. That's not communication. It's just silent expectation. She said nothing. I should have told you more. Would it have changed things? I looked at her. I don't know. That hurt her. But it was true. Her father appeared before she could answer. Chairman CO carried a thick gray binder. Old-fashioned. Paper. The sort of object that looked harmless until an accountant opened it. He held it out to Hyejin. Take this home. What is it? 2018 restructuring. She frowned. I've seen the summary. Not this. She looked at him. He glanced at me once, then back at his daughter. Before you accuse your husband of taking something away, read what he gave us. Chapter 10. What he saved before I knew him. The binder contained no secret marriage contract. No hidden controlling shares. No dramatic clause giving me sewa if somebody insulted me at dinner. Reality was less theatrical, and, in this case, more damaging. Hyejin read it at her father's house. Chairman CO told me later she sat at his dining table for nearly 3 hours. The first section covered Sewa's condition 8 years earlier. Cash reserves nearly exhausted. Supplier obligations overdue. Retail expansion losses. Payroll less than a month from becoming uncertain. A bank tightening its revolving credit line. The factory itself at risk if creditors forced asset sales. Hyejin had known that period had been difficult. She had not known how close it came. Her father had protected her from most of it while she worked in design. Then came the Moro documents. $9 million in subordinated patient capital. Below-market initial property lease. No voting control. No board takeover. No personal guarantee from Hyejin. No pledge of her individual assets. The most unusual clause was not about money. It required Sewa, if a future restructuring occurred while Moro remained exposed, to make reasonable efforts to preserve the manufacturing operation and its workforce before funding discretionary expansion. That clause had been mine. Chairman CO later told me Hyejin read it twice. Why would he do that? She asked. Her father looked at her. Because he had visited the factory. That doesn't explain $9 million. He believed the company could recover. Before we were married? Yes. Before we were even engaged? Yes. She sat back. That was the part that mattered. I had not financed Sewa to buy my way into the family. I had met Chairman CO through manufacturing contacts. Atlas Grid was already working with suppliers connected to Sewa. Moro saw a distressed but viable company. I invested. Later, I met Hyejin properly. We dated. We married. I kept the business relationship separate because I didn't want her wondering whether our marriage changed the terms. In trying to protect the relationship from money, I had allowed money to become a giant unspoken fact inside it. Chairman CEO apparently admitted that to her. I promised him confidentiality, he said. But I also enjoyed letting you think your father solved everything. You did solve it. No. I survived it. There is a difference. Why didn't you tell me? Pride. She looked down at the binder. He continued. And because every year the company became healthier, telling you felt less necessary. Until now. Until you built a $45 million expansion on favors you thought belonged to you. That was her father's style. Warm for approximately 90% of a conversation. Then lethal. While Hygiene was reading the history of what I had done, I was signing financing documents for what I intended to do next. The abandoned industrial site had passed structural and environmental review. The municipality approved incentives tied to rehabilitation. 2 specialty manufacturers signed letters of intent to become anchor tenants. A regional logistics group agreed to participate. Atlas Grid would provide shared operating infrastructure. Suppliers I'd known for years offered reasonable terms. Not because I threatened anyone, because they knew how I worked. One timber supplier called me personally. I heard you're finally building that campus. Apparently. About time. You could have been more encouraging 2 years ago. You were too busy rescuing Sewa. The word rescuing bothered me. Investing. He laughed. Whatever helps you sleep. There was a lesson in that. People around me had noticed my pattern long before I did. I solved. I absorbed. I stabilized. Then I wondered why nobody asked whether it cost me anything. Era slid the financing package across the conference table. Congratulations. I signed. That feels premature. You've been trying to build this for 2 years. And now I'm acquiring a warehouse with a roof that technically has weather inside it. Ambition. Moist ambition. She laughed. My phone rang. Suk. I answered. Her voice was tight. The special board review has been moved to tomorrow. Why? Min-jae submitted a rescue package. That sounded optimistic. What does it require? She paused. Moro extends the note. Of course. You grant a 10-year lease. Naturally. Atlas Grid remains at the current effective rate during migration. Efficient. And the bank refinances the balance. I leaned back. So his rescue packages me. Substantially. I looked at Era. She could tell from my face. What? She asked. I put the call on speaker. Suk continued. He's presenting it as a negotiated package. Has he negotiated with me? No. With Moro? No. With Atlas? No. With the property company? No. Era closed her eyes. I asked, does Hygiene support it? Another pause. I don't know anymore. That answer was more significant than a yes, because for weeks Hygiene had supported Min-jae reflexively. Now she wasn't sure. Suk said, the lenders want an approved restructuring path by 5 tomorrow afternoon. If there isn't one, additional expansion draws stop and covenant remedies begin. There it was, the deadline. Not bankruptcy, not instant ruin, but the moment Sewa would lose freedom to keep pretending the expansion could continue unchanged. I opened my own restructuring proposal. Sell the hospitality development vehicle. Protect manufacturing. Reduce debt. Give the site enough transition time to avoid chaos. Maintain Atlas Grid under normal commercial terms. No punishment. No rescue fantasy either. Era looked at me. You ready? I thought about the gala. The ring. Min-jae beside my wife. For weeks, some small, ugly part of me had imagined this moment. Hygiene discovering everything. Her looking at me differently. Her regretting the choice. I had wanted that. I was human. Then I looked at the financing approval for my new campus sitting beside Sewa's restructuring file. The strange thing was that her regret no longer felt like the most important outcome. Ready? I said. Chapter 11. The meeting where assumptions ended. Min-jae entered Sewa's boardroom, carrying a presentation titled Stabilization and Growth Plan. The word growth was doing heroic work. It was 9:12 in the morning. The deadline was 5. Around the table sat the board, Suk, Chairman CEO, lender representatives, outside counsel, Mira from the bank, Era, and 2 independent advisors. Hygiene sat beside her father. Not beside Min-jae. I noticed. Min-jae noticed too. He opened confidently. The company's core business remains healthy. Our issue is temporary uncertainty created by several legacy counterparties. Legacy counterparties. Apparently, I had become plural. He continued. Our proposed structure resolves those uncertainties while preserving the flagship development. Slide 1. Morrow extends $9 million for 5 years. Slide 2. Morrow Redevelopment 1 grants a 10-year lease. Slide 3. Atlas Grid maintains existing effective pricing through transition. Slide 4. Bank Syndicate refinances remaining development exposure. Beautiful. There was only one issue. 3 of the 4 slides required me to agree. Nobody had asked me. Min Jae finished. One board member turned toward me. Mr. Park, are those terms acceptable? No. Min Jae's expression barely moved. He'd expected resistance. Not final resistance. We're prepared to negotiate details, he said. These aren't details. The underlying principle. No. Hygiene looked down. Min Jae leaned forward. Then I think the board should understand that Morrow's position changed after the personal dispute between Mr. Park and Ms. Seo. There it was. Defense number 1. Era moved a document toward Eun Suk. Eun Suk said, before we discuss timing, I need to correct that. She displayed an email on the screen. Dated 9 days before the gala. Sent to Hygiene. Min Jae. Chairman Seo. Finance Committee. Subject. Legacy assumptions requiring reconfirmation. The email listed all 3. Morrow maturity. Lease renewal. Atlas Grid licensing. Eun Suk looked at Min Jae. You were informed before the anniversary event that these arrangements required confirmation. Min Jae didn't hesitate. That was routine finance caution. Morrow had historically supported Seiwa. Defense number 2. I opened the file Era had prepared. Then why did you write this? His own email appeared. The one from our restaurant meeting. Morrow replaceable through commercial senior debt. Site control expected to remain available. Atlas Grid replaceable within 6 months at limited transitional cost. Min Jae stared at it. I said, you represented Morrow as replaceable. I said alternative capital existed. Yes, it still does. Then, why does your rescue plan require Morrow? A board member looked toward Min Jae. He shifted. Because current market conditions make continuity economically preferable. Era whispered beside me. That was almost impressive. It was. Min Jae was good. That was why Hygiene had chosen him. The problem was that every escape route led to another document. He moved on. The key asset is the site. With a stable long-term lease, lenders have indicated willingness to proceed. Defense number 3. Independent Property Council opened the lease. The current term expires in 4 years. Renewal requires affirmative agreement by both parties. No automatic option exists. Min Jae said, historically, the landlord has cooperated. Council answered, historical cooperation is not a property right. I almost wrote that down. Min Jae turned toward me. You purchased the site specifically because Seiwa needed it. Yes. And benefited from Seiwa as tenant. Yes. Then suggesting the relationship was purely commercial is misleading. I didn't suggest that. He paused. I continued. It was favorable to Seiwa. That's why it shouldn't have been treated as guaranteed. The board member at the far end spoke. Who actually owns Morrow Redevelopment 1? Nobody answered immediately. Hygiene looked at her father. Chairman Seo looked at me. I nodded once. He had kept his promise long enough. Chairman Seo folded his hands. Morrow Redevelopment 1 is controlled through Morrow Holdings. The board member frowned. And Morrow Holdings is controlled by? Chairman Seo said, Park Do-yeon. Nobody gasped. Real boardrooms don't do that. They become quiet in a more interesting way. Pen stop. People reread pages. One lender representative turned directly toward me. Hygiene did not move. Min Jae recovered first. So this confirms the conflict. No, Mira said. Everyone looked at her. She opened the lender analysis. It confirms ownership. Conflict is a separate question. Min Jae turned. The person divorcing Seiwa's executive controls the note, the property, and the operating software. Not quite, I said. He looked at me. Moro controls the note and property. Atlas Grid controls the software. And you control both. Yes. His eyes sharpened. There. He turned to the board. This dependency did not happen by accident. Defense number 4. Unsuk opened another file. Atlas Grid deployment began 8 years ago. She showed implementation history, waste levels, production delays, inventory losses, performance after adoption. Sewa expanded Atlas Grid voluntarily, she said. The board approved each material extension. Min-jae looked at hygiene. She didn't help him. He said, "We were not told replacement would be this difficult." Defense number 5. Sang-ho wasn't in the room, but the vendor report was. Unsuk placed it on screen. Preliminary estimate. Updated estimate. Migration risk. Acknowledgement signed by Min-jae's expansion office. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Min-jae's story was achieving more growth in the company. He rubbed his jaw. Unsuk should have made these risks clearer before the expansion plan was approved. Defense number 6. That was the moment Unsuk stopped looking merely professional. She looked offended. Accountants can tolerate many things. Being blamed for somebody else's unread footnotes is rarely one of them. She placed the board packets on the table. Every maturity date, renewal condition, and licensing dependency was included in the finance appendix. She turned to Hygiene. Ms. Seo signed receipt. Hygiene closed her eyes briefly. "Yes," she said. Min-jae stared at her. "You didn't tell me?" She looked at him. "You received the same packet. I relied on the summary. That was your choice." Something broke between them there. Not romance. That had probably been cracking for weeks. Authority. Min-jae had built his appeal on decisiveness. Hygiene had thought she was choosing a man willing to take risks. Now she could see the difference between taking a risk and assigning it to other people without checking whether they agreed. He turned toward me again. "So, what do you want?" The question filled the room. Finally. Not "what are you doing to us?" Not "why won't you cooperate?" "What do you want?" "I want Sewa's viable business protected." He laughed once. "You expect anyone to believe you have no financial objective?" "I didn't say that. I opened my restructuring proposal. Moro expects repayment under a lawful restructuring. Atlas Grid expects commercial licensing fees. The property company expects market value." "Exactly. Yes. That's how counterparties work." I advanced the page. "Sell the Hospitality Development SPV." Hygiene looked up sharply. I continued. "Use the sale proceeds to reduce development debt and repay part of Moro's exposure. Separate the remaining expansion obligations from manufacturing. Moro will provide a short transition extension. Atlas Grid will sign a normal commercial license with the restructured manufacturing company. The property entity will allow enough time for an orderly sale or transfer." A board member asked, "What ownership do you receive in Sewa?" "None." Min-jae frowned. "What? None? What control rights?" "None beyond ordinary creditor protections during transition." Mira reviewed the summary. "This is financeable." That sentence mattered more than every argument we'd had. Neutral validation. A restructuring advisor nodded. "It preserves the factory." Another board member asked, "And the hospitality project?" "Sold," I said. Hygiene looked at the rendering on the wall. Her flagship, the project she'd tied to her identity. It would continue in some form under another owner, or be redesigned completely. But it would no longer be her monument. Min-jae stood. "This is surrender." Chairman Seo finally spoke. "No." He looked at Min-jae. "This is what happens after people refuse to surrender to facts." The vote happened at 2:41 p.m. The board accepted the restructuring framework. Min-jae's authority was suspended immediately pending termination review. Hygiene was removed from operational control of the development division. The hospitality SPEV would be marketed for sale. The factory would remain protected. For weeks, people who had ignored footnotes became passionate readers. By 3:30, the legal teams were drafting implementation documents. Min-jae packed his laptop. Before leaving, he stopped near me. "This is what you wanted." I looked at him. "No." He smiled bitterly. "You expect me to believe that?" You're free to believe whatever is least expensive next. His face tightened. Then he left. Most directors followed. Mira and the advisors moved to another room. Arrow went with them. Chairman CO paused beside me. Thank you. Don't. For the workers. That part I'll accept. He nodded. Then he left too. Hygiene stayed. We were almost alone when she walked toward me. Her face looked exhausted. No executive posture. No public confidence. No first love standing beside her. Just Hygiene. Do-yun. Yes. If I end things with Min Jae. I said nothing. She swallowed. If I tell the board I was wrong. If I step away from the expansion. If I... Hygiene. Her eyes filled but didn't spill. If I fix this, would you reconsider? Which part? She looked confused. Us. And the financing? She hesitated. That hesitation answered too much. I looked at her for a long moment. If you came to talk about us, talk about us. If you came for money, don't call it love. Her face crumpled slightly. That isn't fair. It's the fairest thing I've said to you. I don't know how to separate them anymore. I know. She looked around the boardroom. At the gala, I thought you were just walking away. I was. I thought you wanted me to stop you. Part of me did. That surprised her. I continued. Then you didn't. She looked at the Moro documents. The land. Atlas. Moro. Dad's company. Her voice dropped. Why didn't you tell me who you were? I could have said because you never asked. That would have been satisfying. It would also have been incomplete. I had hidden behind silence too. I had wanted to be valued without explaining my value. I had expected Hygiene to understand sacrifices I refused to name. That was my flaw, not hers. So I gave her the truth. I wanted to know who I was to you before you knew what I owned. She stared at me. For once, there was no defense. No Min Jae. No financing plan. No company language. Just regret. After several seconds, she asked the question that followed me out of the boardroom. If none of this had happened, were you ever going to tell me? Chapter 12. The life I no longer had to explain. Yes. That was my answer. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But yes. I had intended to tell Hygiene more. We were still standing in the boardroom when I answered. I wanted the marriage to become separate enough from Sewa that explaining Moro wouldn't feel like giving you another reason to depend on me. She laughed softly. It had no humor in it. So, instead you just let me depend on you without knowing. That was accurate. Yes. That's insane. Not my best system design. She wiped beneath one eye. You should have told me. I should have. And I should have asked. Yes. She looked at me. There was something almost peaceful in finally saying things without trying to win. Would knowing have changed the gala? I asked. She looked away. I don't know. Neither do I. That was the last important conversation we had as husband and wife. The rest took months. Real consequences usually did. Sewa's hospitality development division was sold to an unrelated investment group. The price was below the optimistic valuation Min Jae had used, but high enough to reduce debt and complete the restructuring. Moro received repayment according to the negotiated schedule. No penalties invented because I was angry. No seizure of Sewa. No dramatic transfer of the company into my name. I had never wanted Sewa. Chairman CO had spent 30 years building it. The people in the factory had spent their careers making it work. My marriage ending did not magically make their labor mine. The core manufacturing operation survived. Atlas Grid signed a conventional commercial license with it. Normal rates. Normal support. Normal renewal procedures. The sort of arrangement that looked boring on paper. Boring was underrated. 240 employees kept their jobs. The hospitality project was reduced and redesigned under its new owner. The flagship land was later sold at independently appraised market value. Moro didn't hold it over Sewa indefinitely. That chapter ended too. Min Jae was formally removed for presenting unsecured assumptions as though they were committed resources and for failing to disclose material financing risk after receiving warnings. He wasn't arrested. He didn't become homeless. Reality didn't owe me that kind of ending. His punishment was simpler. The reputation that had made him impressive became less impressive. His resume still had good companies on it. But people now asked harder questions about what had happened at Sewa. Eventually, I heard he joined a smaller advisory firm. Probably still wore excellent suits. Probably still gave good presentations. Hopefully, he'd added a second risk slide. Hygiene's consequence was harder. She kept her shares in Sewa. She kept her money. She kept her family. But she lost executive authority. The board brought in outside leadership for the manufacturing business. Chairman CEO moved into a non-executive role. For the first time in her adult life, Hygiene couldn't rely on being the founder's daughter to define her position. Months later, she accepted a design strategy role at a smaller company. Not as president. Not as heir. As an employee. I heard she was good at it. That didn't surprise me. Hygiene had always been talented. Her failure had never been stupidity. It was believing that ambition excused assumptions. Eventually, consequences taught her what I never managed to say properly. Our divorce followed the prenup. Separate property remained separate. Joint property was divided cleanly. Era handled the commercial pieces, but insisted another lawyer lead the family law negotiations. Boundaries, she said. You've become obsessed with those. Somebody has to be. At the final mediation, Hygiene brought a small envelope. We had signed nearly everything. Only a few administrative items remained. She pushed the envelope toward me. What is it? Open it. Inside was my wedding ring and the place card from the Sewa Gala. Park Dioyun. She had kept both. I held the ring between my fingers. For a moment, I remembered placing it beside that card. 200 people watching. Hygiene beside Min-jae. The empty seat. The feeling that I had been erased from a life I had spent years helping stabilize. I thought you'd want it, she said. I don't know what I'd do with it. Neither did I. I placed it back in the envelope. She looked disappointed. Not offended. Just sad. Do-yun? Yes. Do you hate me? No. Did you? I considered it. No. That's worse somehow. Probably. She smiled faintly. Then her expression grew serious. I ended things with Min-jae. I heard. It happened after the board meeting. I nodded. He kept saying if you'd just been honest about who you were, none of it would have happened. What do you think? I think I wanted him to be right. That was one of the most honest things she'd ever said to me. She looked at the table. Because if you manipulated us, then I wasn't the person who made all those choices. I waited. But you didn't. No. You made mistakes. Yes. You hid too much. Yes. You let me think you didn't care about things because you didn't want to argue. Yes. She looked up. But I still chose what I chose. Yes. Her eyes were wet now. Could we ever start again? There it was. The question I had once imagined wanting more than anything. At the gala, if she'd followed me into the elevator and asked, I would have turned around. A week later, maybe, even after the restaurant, part of me would have considered it. But months had changed the shape of the question. Going back wasn't just going back to hygiene. It meant returning to the version of myself who proved love by making problems disappear. The man who never said what he needed. The man who quietly carried things and secretly hoped somebody would eventually notice the weight. I didn't want to be him again. I don't think we should. She nodded slowly. You don't love me anymore? That isn't the reason. Then what is? I loved you while making myself smaller than I should have. You loved me while assuming that was my natural size. She closed her eyes. I continued gently. If we went back now, we'd spend years wondering whether you wanted me or what you finally learned about me. I know what I'd be choosing. Maybe. You don't believe me. I believe you mean it. Then why isn't that enough? Because I don't need it to be anymore. She looked at me for a long time. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. Did you want me to regret it? I laughed quietly. At first, she smiled through tears. I knew it. At first, I repeated. Then I found better things to want. That was the last line between us that mattered. We signed the papers. The marriage ended. Not with revenge. Not with forgiveness that erased consequences. Just an ending. Afterward, I walked outside and realized I had nowhere I was required to be for the next hour. That used to make me anxious. Somebody always needed something. A vendor. Sewa. Chairman CEO. Hygiene. Now my phone was silent. I bought coffee and sat by myself. It was surprisingly pleasant. My new manufacturing campus opened 7 months later. The ruined warehouse had changed completely. We kept part of the old brick structure and restored the steel frame. Small manufacturers shared shipping infrastructure, warehouse capacity, atlas planning tools, and maintenance resources. The old rail spur worked again. Sang-ho joined as operations chief after completing his obligations at Sewa. On his first morning, he stood in the new control room and looked at the production dashboard. You realize I'm going to complain about this software too. I'd be worried if you didn't. Good. Just put complaints in writing. He stared at me. I've heard that joke. It wasn't a joke the first time. Suppliers came to the opening. Municipal officials came. Atlas employees. Partners. Old friends. Chairman CEO attended briefly. He and I spoke near the entrance. He looked older after retirement. Lighter too. Hygiene is doing well, he said. I'm glad. She works for someone who tells her no. Excellent professional development. He laughed, then became serious. I failed her too. You protected her. Too much. I understood what he meant. Protection could become another form of concealment. Before leaving, he bowed his head slightly. Not formally. Just enough. Take care of yourself. I will. This time I believed it. Era arrived late. Not because of work. That was new. Our relationship had changed slowly after the divorce. No dramatic confession. No revenge romance. We had dinner once because neither of us wanted to cook. Then again because the first dinner had been good. Eventually she informed me that ordering food twice no longer qualified as accidental. We were still figuring it out. The difference was that we talked. Sometimes inconveniently. Especially inconveniently. A month into dating, she'd asked what I wanted from the relationship. My first instinct had been to say, we'll see. Instead, I answered. That felt more dangerous than any financing negotiation I'd ever done. At the campus reception, Era found me staring at a small, empty display stand beside the main lobby. What goes there? She asked. Nothing yet. You need an award. I have enough plaques in storage. Maybe the Atlas Award. No. Photograph. No. She looked at the empty stand. Plant. That's possible. Look at you. Taking risks. I smiled. Across the room, Sang-ho was arguing with an engineer. Two suppliers were comparing notes. People were eating food I'd actually remembered to taste. Nobody needed emergency refinancing, an underrated feature of social events. Era touched my arm. You're thinking too hard. I'm looking at the empty space. And, months earlier, an empty place beside hygiene had meant I'd been replaced. An empty chair. An abandoned ring. Proof that something was missing. I had spent years treating empty space like a problem. A silence needed filling. A difficulty needed solving. A person needed rescuing. A relationship needed preserving even when only one person was carrying it. I looked around the campus. At people who knew I founded Atlas Grid. Who knew I owned Moro. Who knew I could solve difficult problems. And more importantly, people I was finally allowing to know when I didn't want to. There was no hidden identity left to reveal. No wife whose regret I needed. No rival I needed to defeat. No company I needed to save in order to prove what I had been worth. Era tapped the display stand. So, I left it empty. Empty spaces don't always need filling. She considered that. Very profound. Thank you. Still think a plant would look better. Also possible. She walked toward the reception. I followed. Behind us, the empty stand remained exactly where it was. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel responsible for putting something there.